Good morning, everyone. Hello. I hope you're all well. I'm a little under the weather this morning. I've tested negative already, so I think it's just a cold. The weather's been kind of up and down here, but I'm a little congested, so sorry if I don't sound particularly healthy, but I'm okay. Also, quick update for everybody who's been asking about the donut. It's funny because since Twitter's little implosion on Monday, the inquiry that I'm getting more than any other one on any place where I'm active is about my dog, which is funny and sweet. He has a cast on his leg. He is okay. He's in a cone. And we're waiting for the results of the biopsy of the tumor that they took off his leg. So hopefully it'll all be fine. The vet was very confident that she had removed all of it. We're a little nervous, and he's not happy about the cone and not happy about the cast, but he'll be okay. And, we'll obviously keep you all posted on all of that. Okay, so we have one question this morning that is very complex, and I want to address it in the best way that I can because it's something that we haven't actually talked about that much here. We've talked about it a little bit off and on, but I want everybody to kind of understand where the debate lies. So there was an announcement. I think it was like late Monday night now, but there was a lot more coverage of it yesterday about the fact that Biden is apparently now revisiting the issue of canceling student loan debt. This is very good news. I say that as someone who still has law school loans to this day. Again, they've been around forever, but the interest rates are obscene. And I would be very happy to see the last chunk disappear. I have been behind this for quite some time. And as many of you know, back when the Warren campaign was in full swing, this was a primary issue of that platform. And it continues to be something that Warren and Ayanna Pressley and Chuck Schumer and others continue to push. And part of that is because it is so universally wanted that it would be a really big get for the Democrats, particularly heading into November. So the question that we had this morning was about the executive order power and what he can and cannot do. Now, on the issue of student loans, let me back up for a second, actually, before I even go there. So the president, as we all know, has the power to do some things, by executive order. The executive order power is not explicitly written into the Constitution. So there's not something in the Constitution that says the president has the power to do X, Y, and Z by executive order. It doesn't say that. It does give the executive the power to fairly enforce the law. And this is where a little bit of the dispute arises, because executive orders have been used by every president since the dawn of America. And sometimes those executive orders have then been challenged in court. There is some precedential authority about the limits of executive power. So for instance, ordinarily, when we say that there is executive power, that means power over the executive branch. That means, for instance, the president can say, and again, Trump did the opposite and Biden has done the reverse. Say to the EPA, for instance, which is an agency inside the executive branch, by this executive order, I am instructing you to study the effects of air pollution on human health. That would be, for instance, an example of the use of the executive order power to do something that would impact, human health inside the executive branch. All right. What the executive order power cannot do is impinge upon the powers of another branch of government. So, for instance, the president can't say, I'm raising taxes on everybody who makes more than $500 million a year or whatever, $500,000 a year, to give you the broad swath of tax plans that have been proposed at various moments by various candidates. The president cannot do that by executive order. Okay. The issue of taxation and what tax rates should be falls squarely within congressional authority. The other thing that the president can't do, for instance, is say, I am ordering Medicare for all by executive order. That also is something that would fall within the power of the legislative branch of government. Similarly, the president could not by executive order say, I am preserving Roe versus Wade. That falls within the power of the judicial branch of our government. And I'm going to remind everybody, just to go back to the very basics, we have three branches of government in our democracy: the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. And the balance of powers says that each branch has its own level of responsibility off of our government, and each branch serves as a counterbalance to the other. Okay. So by executive order, the president can do certain things that would arguably enforce the law or fall within the purview of the executive branch. Now, here's where it gets really tricky on student loans. The Department of Education falls within the executive branch. And there are various laws that have been written by the Congress, signed by the president into law, that cover what student loans and student debt are all about. And there is a debate, a very hearty debate, about what the Secretary of Education, sits on the president's cabinet under the control of the executive branch, can do in relation to student loan debt. Okay. There is there's two particular clauses of various laws that are roundly debated right now. And this is the reason why you will see people on the centrist Democrat side saying things like the president doesn't have the authority to overrule student loan debt. There are some provisions in laws that, if read, and I don't need to go into the details of this, but there are commas and there are semicolons, and this is often the way that statutes are interpreted when courts review them, that if read one way, seem to indicate that student debts that are reneged upon must be collected by the Department of Education. And that would arguably interfere with the ability to just entirely cancel student loan debt outright. However, if they are read another way, the president can, by executive order the Secretary of Education to waive student loans. And, that authority has historically been limited to things like public interest service programs and the like. There are debates about whether or not this could actually work. All right. Now, I happen to fall, as many of you know, in the camp that says, by my reading of this, the president should be able to do it, that this would be something that falls within the executive order power because it concerns the Department of Education, the Secretary of Education, and the enforcement of the laws concerning when student loans can be forgiven. This will likely, again, I have big questions as to who would have standing to do this. Okay. Now, you all remember standing means you have to be actually impacted by a case or conflict that's being litigated. All right. So it may be challenged in a court of law if he tries to do this. Presumably, the challenger would be a private student loan company. That's my guess, that it would be a company that says, we acquired all of these student loans for servicing in exchange for interest payments. And basically you've removed our ability to make money off of this, this asset that we acquired, namely consolidated student loans. I don't know how that would go. I expect that it would be challenged in court. But the long and the short of it is that this is really worth a shot in my book, because there is a very strong argument that it does fall within the power of the executive, and also because it is such a favorably viewed idea through the lens of the vast majority of Americans. So we'll see what happens with it. I mean, my bet at this point is that they're going to try to do it at some point before the election. In fact, the meeting that the president had with the Hispanic caucus a couple of days ago, which is where the news that this was under reconsideration began to break, seems to indicate that he's planning on doing something this summer. And right now, interest rates are frozen again on student loans through the 31st of August. So if we were to have an executive order this summer that basically forgave an enormous amount of student loan debt in this country, that would be a very solid setup, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks before the midterm elections. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see. Now, the one other aspect of this question that came up this morning on the feed was, well, can he do this with regard to voting rights? No. That is because that falls within the legislative power of the congressional branch of government. And because, the nature of voting rights legislation has already been challenged and in part overturned by the Supreme Court. So, again, you have to remember that there are limitations on what the executive power can do, and it has to be something that falls within the executive branch. Again, the president can by executive order, for instance, tell the Department of Education that educational funding can be withdrawn from school districts that persecute trans and non-binary kids. That is within the power of the executive because it concerns the execution and the distribution of funds already allocated by Congress to the DOE. Okay, everybody understand that? Power of the purse Congress, money goes to the Department of Education. How that money is allocated by the DOE then can be within the power of the executive branch. All right. But not everything can be done by executive order. And frankly, I just want to point out to everyone that despite the fact that we need a lot of change in this country, we do not want a lone president to have that much power. All you have to do to remember how this works is think back to the Muslim ban. Because the Muslim ban, which President Trump signed 7 days into his only term, but 7 days into his presidency, was an executive order. Frankly, immigration has never been something that has been under the purview of the executive branch, right? That's Homeland Security, right? The Department of Homeland Security, which obviously falls within the purview of the executive branch. But immigration rights are ordinarily covered by legislation. And so, that the reason why the ban was stayed was because the determination was being made that the president didn't have that power. I don't want a president to have the power to ban abortion, frankly. I don't want the president to have the power to say, no, Black American has the right to vote. So you have to think about this from a both sides kind of perspective here in the context of how our democracy functions. I would like to see Biden do whatever he can do to the limit of executive order power on student loans and a lot more. But I also am under no illusion that any action taken in that regard is likely to be challenged in the courts. And as we all see, if you get a case in front of a Trump-appointed judge, all bets are off. So that's my thought on that. All right. We had a question about the Department of State this morning. Many of you will remember that we spent a lot of the Trump administration on this broadcast talking about Homeland Security, the State Department, the fact that many lifelong diplomats and employees in various very significant branches of our government abandoned ship, and rightfully so, or were pushed out of office. The cybersecurity office of the State Department was gutted under Donald Trump. We had so many ambassadorships and foreign service appointments that just sat completely vacant. I will tell you that there does seem to be an indication that a lot of that has been repaired. Has it all been fixed? Absolutely not. We had 4 years of absolute decimation of the State Department. But I do think that Blinken, at least from all outward appearances, because I'm going to remind everybody, a lot of this we knew about during the Trump administration because of leaked information that came from former State Department employees. At least from what we can see with Blinken, our State Department does appear at the moment to be pretty fairly functional. Blinken was in Ukraine over the weekend, and it's also very clear that state has been working with the Ukrainian government to support their efforts to quell Russia's invasion. We also have seen the State Department be engaged in, some very significant diplomatic efforts over the last little while. Just this morning, there was a prisoner exchange that released someone out of a Russian prison who had been in there for a very long time. We still don't have any movement on Brittany Griner. I would like to see movement on that. But, diplomatic efforts, and particularly back-channel diplomatic efforts, appear to be functioning fairly well from what we can see. I will just say that we have not had any horrific news out of the State Department recently, and also the 2020 election. Despite everything that happened on January 6th, it seems pretty clear that that the efforts to combat election interference from inside state. I'm going to remind everybody that we know that efforts were taken in 2018 to combat cyber interference in elections without Trump's authorization. Many of you may remember this. That Gina Haspel undertook, and Kirsten, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget her name, the head of DHS under Trump, who left halfway through, that she undertook efforts to stop fundamentally cybersecurity issues that would have interfered in the 2018 election, and did it on her own. So all that said, state appears to be working relatively well right now. Never say never. There's a lot that we don't know publicly. The State Department, by the way, reminder, is notoriously secretive. But from where we sit at the moment, things look like they've improved. And that's all to the credit of Biden and Blinken, and I think it's as it should be. I mean, you all know this, at least those of you who were here then, how terrifying it was to me when we knew that cybersecurity was basically vacant under Trump. Because the potential for threat without cyber defenses in this environment is an enormous national security concern, right? Power grids, nuclear plants, telecommunications, right? Things that our country really relies on to keep people alive and to keep information circulating freely and to keep democracy stable. So again, so far so good. We shall see. Okay, Twitter. So those of you who are subscribed to the newsletter, which is newsletterwithecm.substack.com, know that already this week I've written twice about the kind of devolution of what's happening on Twitter. I will just tell you all that, I said this yesterday in our office hours inside the atelier, and just in brief summary, I'm not going to go into as much detail as I went into there because that was an hour, but I'll just say that, I think that even if the Musk deal does not complete, because I'm going to remind everybody, due diligence, there's 3 to 6 month process. The sale has not been accomplished yet. Yesterday, Tesla's value dropped 3 times the value of Twitter as a whole. And Musk has put up 1/5 of his ownership in Tesla to back the acquisition of Twitter, which is insane. Like, it's a terrible exercise of business judgment. But regardless, even if it goes through, the landscape of Twitter has changed so much in the last 48 hours that I have a question about whether Twitter could even recover. And that has to do with the fact that it has shaken up the internal staff at Twitter dramatically. There's a lot less faith in the ability of Twitter under Musk, or even during the transition, to effectively police harassment and abuse. I will add that I have seen an enormous uptick in reports from friends, even though I haven't been on there, on what they're experiencing right now in terms of swarms and troll attacks and the like. And the reality of it is that, Musk is after this because he wants to control public perception. And even if it doesn't end up completely in his hands, the fact that Twitter went for it I think may be a death blow to what Twitter was even aiming to be in terms of a public square from here on out. Now, I know there are people who want to stay put and say, I'm staying here to kind of combat disinformation. One of the things I said in this morning's newsletter is more power to them, but I really doubt that a handful of progressive accounts can combat what are literally millions of bot farm accounts that are designed to do nothing but assault us with disinformation and harass people who challenge it. And that's the nature of what Twitter allowed itself to become even before now. So, I'm taking a pause. And I also, as you all know, have Elon Musk basically represents everything that I despise about America. And, what we put onto Twitter is a product. I don't think anybody should be under any illusion that this is an issue of free speech, right? First of all, like freedom of speech is about the government not repressing speech, not private companies or public companies or Elon Musk or Jack Dorsey or anybody, right? The First Amendment is about the government not regulating speech, okay? But the flip side of it is that, there is no way for Twitter to truly be, a place where you can speak your mind if harassment and abuse are allowed to run rampant. And then you have to add to the fact that there's this mysterious thing that has happened over the last 48 hours, to myself included. I poked my head in there this morning just to see what was going on. I've lost 1,300 followers in 36 days and 36 hours. And most prominent progressive accounts with followers over 100,000, like mine, have lost 4 figures in followers since the deal was announced. That's really weird. And it's not about just like people leaving. Because by the way, everybody I know who's kind of done this has done what I did, which is like you download your data, you wipe your tweets, and then you just sit there. You don't actually close your account. And one of the things that I'll just say about that as well is that Ron DeSantis gained 100,000 followers on Monday night for reasons that no one has been able to explain. And he's not alone on that front either. So either Twitter undertook an effort to delete bots, which would explain the declination in accounts, but it would have to be both progressive and right-wing accounts. This situation is weird. And there's no legitimate explanation for it yet. The suspicion is that new bot farms were created en masse, by someone trying to amplify the value of Twitter to benefit Elon Musk. And that, who knows what the explanation is for what's happened to the rest of us. It's a very strange set of facts. And I personally, it makes me very nervous just about like what the future holds on that platform. So, I encourage you all to head over to the newsletter and read what I had to say about the importance of offline organizing and preparing for November and everything else, because, the fear that exists to a certain extent about what an end to Twitter could mean for organizing, in my opinion, has a little bit of truth to it, but a lot of it is misplaced. It's going to require a shift in strategy. It's going to require us to do something that I've been recommending here for a very long time, namely getting invested in your local community efforts at organizing an election, get out the vote. And, to do that in ways that actually reach people where they are, because we're not going to win an election just by tweeting. That was never the way that it worked. And, to lament this without doing what needs to be done outside of it would be a tragedy. So that's where I sit on it. And, I don't want to discount. I said in the newsletter, I think that Twitter has done a lot of great things. It allowed me to protect my kids during the pandemic. I learned a ton about epidemiology, right? It created channels of connection to great thinkers and to people who have, been incredible commentators and writers on the current state of our political landscape. That's all true and legitimate. I have friends who I made on Twitter, right? But all that said, there is such a high cost right now to those of us who are prominent commentators being out there on Twitter. And our value is exploited, and we are harassed, and we are abused, and we are doxxed. And if that gets exponentially worse under a Musk Twitter, which it already appears to be getting exponentially worse just since the announcement of the acquisition, that I think is going to mean a lot of things for those of us who have been there in ways that were designed to contribute to the public discourse, who have had to sacrifice a lot for that. I just don't want Musk making money off of me. That's really kind of like one of the things that it comes down to. In addition to the fact that it's just really hard. You can't, I mean, even those of us with the thickest skins have a very hard time being present on that platform and being subjected to constant abuse and harassment and personal attacks and threats and doxing and everything else, right? So I just encourage you all to think about what you can do outside of Twitter. And in the moments where you're not on there now, which I hope are a lot more, hopefully you've cleared up a little bit of brain space to think through, A, what it feels like to you to not be on there. You know, I'm like I mentioned in this morning's newsletter that I'm sleeping far better in the last 2 days, and I have in a really long time. And I have to note that, right? But also what you're going to do with that time instead. And, you know, that's that. You know, again, there are some names that I could shout out here, like MySpace and Tumblr. All good platforms come to an end at some point, right? I just want to remind everybody, though, that you don't have to sell your soul or your sanity for the sake of organizing and getting out the vote and saving democracy. There's so many other better ways to use your time and your voice. So that's where I am on it. And I want to thank you all for asking the question about, like, what am I doing? One quick note here. I did have somebody ask explicitly how I have done what I've done there. So you can Google how to download your archive. It's very easy. It's, you know, straight through your account security links on Twitter. There are several external platforms that you can use to mass delete tweets. I'm on Tweet Deleter. I've been on it for like 3 years. This is something nobody has really noticed this until now, because I always wait until a couple of months into the year to do it. But historically, for the last 3 years, I've wiped everything through New Year's Eve, the year before, somewhere around March and April. And I do it, you know, I have done it historically because I find the gotcha culture that can exist on Twitter when somebody becomes the character of the day, where they go back and they find a tweet that you posted in 2011 that is some horribly bad take. I find that a little hard to swallow. And, you know, part of that is because all of us grow and learn, right? You know, I mean, I've talked very publicly here on Twitter, elsewhere in my book, about my own trajectory with anti-racism work over the last 5 years. You know, there are certainly things that I did at various moments historically online. Fortunately, not things that I said, I don't think. But there are certainly things that were just not aware enough, and that required me to make apologies and amends. And I did that, right? I don't really feel the need to have a permanent historical record of my growth trajectory online. And I never have. You know, and I'm not alone in this, by the way. Like, Anand Giridharadas has never had more than 100 tweets up at once. He deletes his tweets like every week. And I personally think that that's a really wise move. You know, but you should own your data. And the one thing I will say is I highly encourage you to go download your archive, keep it on your hard drive, keep it somewhere that's yours. I mean, I have a whole series of them now. Before you do that. And, you know, you may need them depending on how much you tweet. You may need it anyway for a platform like Tweet Deleter, because Tweet Deleter will only delete a certain number of tweets for free. And they will only delete a certain number of tweets at a time, even if you're a paid subscriber, if you do not have your full archive. So you have to upload your archive in many instances to Tweet Deleter if you tweet a lot, in order to really like wipe it all. I just happen to think it's good internet hygiene. That's my 2 cents. You know, and I frankly think that I know that Sarah Kendzior has been like, Twitter's a very important historic record. Okay, fine. That may be true for purposes of presidential records. That I do not deny. But I'm not sure I really agree that, the average citizen, commentator, even public person, arguably like myself, needs to have a years-long record of what they've done or said online. I just don't see the point. And, frankly, I don't really like the idea of it. I'm not out there, publishing my journals online and expecting that I'll be held to account on those for the last 20 years. Right. I think that there's an argument to be made that just simply being clear about all of that and not keeping anything for purposes of nostalgia, right, makes a lot of sense. So that's my two cents rather on that. And that's it. I frankly, I just also will say that I generally have really enjoyed the experience of deleting my past tweets. Like when I wiped all of 2020, I was very happy that day. I was like, oh my God, I just erased the worst year in history on my own Twitter feed. So, again, it depends on your attitude toward this, but I happen to think that it's a smart move. And, also that, at this moment in particular, when we don't know what's going to happen with our data and our conversations and everything else, that, that's not to say Twitter doesn't have a record of all of it, because my bet is that they do. But I want to think twice about whose hands that might fall into going forward. So that's it. All right, everybody. I will see you all on Friday. Please, by the way, if you are enjoying the newsletter, the rebooted newsletter now, where I'm writing like 3 times a week or more, please share it with people. The subscriptions there really make a difference. And, we're working on building that again here, as we have been over the last 2 months. So I would love it if you would, hit that share button that's in the middle of it. And if you want to kick some subscription money our way, so you can comment as well there. The community there is like growing and lovely as usual. You cannot comment on that feed unless you are a subscriber, but it's super cheap. It's like $5 a month, $50 a year. I hope to see you all over there and also here on Friday. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. See you then. Bye.